In 1959, on October 2nd, an extraordinary television show premiered on CBS that would become one of the most acclaimed, most influential, most beloved television series in the entire history of American broadcast. The Twilight Zone premiered to modest ratings. Nobody knew at the time that they were watching the beginning of something that would transform television forever. The show was created by Rod Serling, a brilliant socially conscious writer and television producer who was known in Hollywood as the angry young man for his refusal to compromise with sponsors and network executives over issues of censorship, racism, and social justice. Twilight Zone was unlike anything that had ever been broadcast before. Each episode was a self-contained story. Some were science fiction, some were horror, some were psychological thrillers, some were dark comedies. All of them ended with unexpected twists that forced viewers to reconsider what they had just watched. The show blended fantasy, suspense, moral lessons into something that was simultaneously entertaining and intellectually challenging. In the opening narration, Rod Serling would invite viewers into a place between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge, dimension that existed not only of sight and sound, but of mind. For 5 seasons and 156 episodes from 1959 to 1964, Twilight Zone aired on CBS. Rod Serling wrote 92 of those episodes himself. The show won dozens of Emmy Awards. It attracted talented writers including Richard Matheson, Charles Beaumont, and George Clayton Johnson. Featured guest stars including William Shatner, Jack Klugman, Peter Falk, Robert Redford, dozens of other actors who would go on to become famous. The show was a critical success and a cultural phenomenon. It became one of the most important television series ever made, influencing everything that came after it. Behind the scenes of this groundbreaking, beloved show, the real people who made it were living complex, difficult, and tragic lives. Is the true story of what really happened to the cast and creators of The Twilight Zone. And it is a story of brilliance and tragedy, creative vision destroyed by illness, and of a tragedy on a film set that shocked the nation. Rod Serling created The Twilight Zone and was the heart of the show. He was more than just the creator and host. He was the voice of the show. In the opening of every episode, his distinctive world-weary voice would narrate the story. At the end of every episode, he would appear on camera to deliver the closing moral or social commentary. For millions of viewers, Rod Serling was The Twilight Zone, was the guide leading viewers through the uncanny, the mysterious, the dangerous dimensions of human experience. But Rod Serling paid a terrible price for his creative vision and his social consciousness. He was a heavy smoker, consuming 3 to 4 packs of cigarettes per day. He was a compulsive worker, often writing multiple television shows simultaneously while also teaching college courses on film and drama. He was stressed, pushed by his own perfectionism, and his desire to maintain creative control over his work against the constant pressure from network executives and sponsors who wanted to water down his vision. On May 3, 1975, Rod Serling suffered a heart attack while mowing the lawn at his summer home in upstate New York. He was 50 years old. He was hospitalized for 2 weeks and seemed to recover. But 2 weeks after his release, he suffered a second heart attack. Doctors recommended open-heart surgery, which was considered extremely risky at the time, necessary to save his life. The operation took place on June 26, 1975. The surgery lasted more than 10 hours. But during the operation, Rod Serling suffered a third heart attack. He never regained consciousness. He died the following day, June 28, 1975, at Strong Memorial Hospital in Rochester, New York. He was 50 years old. The surgeon said his arteries were disintegrating from stress, years of heavy smoking, caffeine, and alcohol consumption combined with a family history of early death. Serling's father had died at age 52. Rod had always known that this fate was hanging over his head. Rod Serling's death was a tragedy not just for his family, but for television. He had created The Twilight Zone, but he also had so much more to give. He had created Night Gallery, another anthology series that began in 1970. He had helped write the screenplay for Planet of the Apes. He had so much more that he wanted to create, so many more stories that he wanted to tell. Death at age 50 robbed the world of decades of creative work. The greatest tragedy in the history of The Twilight Zone would not happen until 8 years later, and it would happen not on the original television series, but on a film that was being made as a tribute to that series. In 1983, Warner Brothers released Twilight Zone, the movie. The film was an anthology consisting of 4 separate segments, each directed by a famous filmmaker. Steven Spielberg directed one segment, Joe Dante directed another, George Miller directed a third. John Landis, known for his work on the comedies The Blues Brothers and Animal House, directed the first segment. Landis's segment was an original story created specifically for the film. It was a Vietnam War scene in which an actor named Vic Morrow would play a racist American bigot who is transported backward through time and forced to experience what it feels like to be the victim of prejudice. In one scene, his character is supposed to be running through a river with 2 child actors, fleeing from a pursuing military helicopter. Special effects explosives are rigged to detonate behind the helicopter, creating the illusion of an attack. Helicopter is supposed to crash to the ground in a fiery explosion behind the running actors. On July 23, 1982, at 2:30 in the morning, film crew was shooting this final scene. It was supposed to be the last day of shooting. Vic Morrow, age 53, was a working actor who had become famous in the 1960s for his role in the television series Combat. He was the father of 2 daughters, including a young actress named Jennifer Jason Leigh, who would go on to become famous in her own right. On the set that night were also 2 child actors, Micah Dinla, age 7, and Renee Shin-Yi Chen, age 6. 3 actors were positioned in a river to perform the scene. The helicopter hovered approximately 25 feet above them. Special effects explosives were rigged and ready to be detonated. When the director called action, the explosives detonated. The explosions were far more powerful than anticipated. The force of the explosions caused the helicopter's tail rotor to be struck. Pilot lost control of the aircraft. The helicopter dipped forward and crashed into the 3 actors below. What happened next was one of the most horrific accidents in the history of film production. The helicopter's main rotor struck all 3 actors. 6-year-old Renee Shin-Yi Chen was crushed to death. 7-year-old Micah Dinlay was decapitated. Vic Morrow was also decapitated. Accident happened in front of dozens of crew members. Multiple crew members were also injured in the crash. The scene that was supposed to have Vic Morrow saying the line, "I'll keep you safe, kids. I promise. Nothing will hurt you, I swear to God," instead became the place where he died, along with 2 children, in one of the most tragic accidents in the history of motion pictures. Accident sent shockwaves through Hollywood. It was the worst on-set tragedy anyone could remember. Investigation that followed revealed horrifying details. The explosives had been improperly calculated. Helicopter's flight path had been far too low. The scene had been poorly planned and barely rehearsed. There had been no proper safety protocols in place. The use of child actors in such a dangerous stunt was reckless and negligent. Director John Landis and 4 other crew members, including the special effects coordinator and the helicopter pilot, were charged with involuntary manslaughter. It was the first time in the history of American cinema that a film director had been charged with a death on the set of a feature film. The case went to trial and lasted nearly 9 months. In the end, Landis and the other defendants were acquitted, but the trial revealed the deep negligence and carelessness that had led to the deaths. Tragedy of the accident was compounded by the tragedy of the legal outcome. Families of the child actors sued and settled out of court for undisclosed amounts. But for many people in Hollywood and beyond, justice had not been served. 3 people were dead and no one had been held criminally responsible. Twilight Zone. The movie was released in June 1993 to mixed reviews. The film was financially successful, earning $42 million at the box office against a $10 million budget. But the film would forever be associated with the tragedy that occurred during its making. When people think of Twilight Zone, the movie, think not of the artistry of the different directors or the quality of the stories, but of the 3 people who died on the set. Tragedy prompted changes in film and television production. Safety standards were strengthened. Child labor laws were amended. Use of dangerous special effects became more carefully regulated. The accident that killed Vic Morrow and 2 children led to genuine changes that have saved lives in the decades since. But the accident also had a profound impact on the actors and crew who were present that night. Many of them suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. Some left the industry entirely. Some spent years trying to process what they had witnessed. Dorsey Wingo, the helicopter pilot, traumatized by the knowledge that he had not been able to evade the explosion and save the 3 people below him. For the rest of his life, he was haunted by the fact that Morrow had not looked up at the helicopter as instructed and therefore had not had time to try to escape. Morrow left behind 2 daughters, including Jennifer Jason Leigh, who went on to have a successful acting career. Death meant that she grew up without her father. The 2 child actors, Micah Dinla and Renee Shin-Yi Chen, were not able to grow up at all, were 6 and 7 years old. Their families grieved the loss of their children for the rest of their lives. Other cast members of the Twilight Zone original series had their own struggles. Many of them were typecast by their roles on the show. Some had difficulty finding work after the series ended. Some struggled with addiction. Some died relatively young. Burgess Meredith, who became famous for his role as the Penguin in the Batman series, lived to be 89, struggled throughout his career with the weight of being defined by a single iconic role. Legacy of the Twilight Zone is complicated and bittersweet. On one hand, show is recognized as one of the greatest television series ever made. It won dozens of Emmy Awards. It has been honored and celebrated by critics and audiences for more than 60 years. It changed television, influenced everything that came after it. It is still watched and beloved today, but the legacy of the Twilight Zone is also marked by tragedy. Rod Serling, the creative genius who made the show, died at 50 years old. The show's influence on cinema and television came at the cost of his health and ultimately his life. Attempt to create a film's tribute to the show ended in tragedy, with the deaths of 3 people, including 2 children. Twilight Zone was a show about the strange and the mysterious, about the dimension that exists in the mind of human beings. But the real story of the Twilight Zone is not about the dimensions that exist in the mind. It is about the dimensions that exist in the real world. Dimension of grief, the dimension of loss, the dimension of tragedy that lies just beneath the surface of our ordinary lives. If you have watched The Twilight Zone, or if you have discovered it through streaming services or reruns, please share your thoughts in the comments below. What does the show mean to you? Which episode stayed with you the most? How did the show influence your own thinking about life and the world? Because remembering these stories and honoring the real people who made them, how we keep their memory alive. The Twilight Zone will endure. Long after all of us are gone, people will still be discovering the show, still being moved by its stories, still being changed by its vision. Rod Serling's legacy is secure. Show he created will outlive him by generations, but we should remember that his legacy came at a cost, and we should honor the people who paid that cost with their health, their lives, and their time with loved ones.